We say things like, maybe later, perhaps another time, or I'll see you tomorrow. But for some of us, there won't be a tomorrow. Listen as your worst nightmares come to life. These nightmares have become someone's reality. My name is Justin Crowley, and this is The Murder Project. Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 23 of The Murder Project. It has been a little bit of a break for us. It was unscheduled. I'm so glad to be back and in the studio, quote unquote, my house, recording and bringing another episode to you. Today we're going to be discussing a case that is pretty unsettling, as most of these are. But this is a case that is not only about murder, but it puts us in a situation where you feel the most vulnerable. You feel like your trust has been shattered, that all of these things that happen in this situation that we're about to talk about put you in a really uneasy position and feeling uneasy. Today we're going to be talking about the story of Cara Knott and what exactly happened to her, because it is a wild one. I'm glad to be back in here talking to you guys, so strap in, ladies and gentlemen. Episode 23 starts right now. It's just after Christmas in 1986, San Diego, California. Now, Cara Knott is a student at this time at San Diego State University, and as I mentioned, she is probably on Christmas break due to what time of the year it is. To explain a little bit about Cara, I think that it would be, in most cases, we have nice things to say about victims of crimes and things like that, but Lori Johnston over at Medium stated that she was a vivacious, bubbly young woman and the stereotypical Southern California girl. She had blonde hair. She was really pretty. If you look at the pictures of her, you can see that she is very pretty. And in some of the pictures, I think due to her hairstyle, she looks like she is a little bit older. But in fact, she is only 20 years old in December of 1986. She was born on February 11th of 1966. So I'm not the greatest at math, but that one's easy, 20 years old. At the time of this incident, Cara was, like I said, she was going to San Diego State University. Now, at the time of this incident, Cara was in the San Diego area. It looks like she lived in El Cajon, and I'm assuming that is a suburb of the San Diego area. And she had been dating a gentleman for several years. I believe it was 4 years. And she was on her way. This is December 27th, 1986. And she was on her way to her boyfriend's house, and he lived in Escondido, California. So from what I understand, this is about a 45-minute drive, and when she left to go see her boyfriend that day, she was doing so because her boyfriend was sick, and he had the flu, I believe, and she wanted to go and take care of him and bring him some necessities that he needed and check up on him. And so it looks like from the research that she did, in fact, do that. She drove down there. She checked on her boyfriend. She hung out with him for a little while. And then as it got into the evening hours, she did what she normally does, and she called her parents, and she told them that she was on her way home. Now, like several other episodes that we've done in the past, this is 1986, so there are no cell phones. So Cara calls her parents and tells them that she is on her way home. And from what I understand, this is probably around the 8 or 9 o'clock window at nighttime. And she leaves and she heads out. While she's on her way to her parents' house, she's making the drive back. She had a, I believe, 1968 Volkswagen Beetle. And if you guys are familiar with those, they are very small, very compact cars. They also have a very small motor and a small gas tank. So they do get very good gas mileage, but the gas tank on them is not very large. So she stopped at a Chevron gas station and filled up her car. After this, no one ever sees Cara alive again. She, for the most part, at this time, vanishes without a trace. So as it gets into the later hours of the night, around midnight, her parents start getting worried about her because they haven't been able to get a hold of her, and she hasn't arrived at her house. It does state that her parents called and confirmed with her boyfriend that she had left his house, and he gave them about the approximate time, so they were able to figure out that, no doubt about it, Cara should have already been home, but she wasn't. It states that Cara's parents called the police to report that Cara was missing. And what the police told her, from what their research shows me, is that they gave her the classic answer I think we've heard in several other cases before, where since she had not been missing for 24 to 48 hours, it usually ranges depending on the area, that they couldn't make a report or report her as a missing person. So they do not go out and initially search for Cara, because in their opinion, she could have made a pit stop, she could have stopped at a friend's house, she could be out partying. Who knows what they think that she might be doing, but Cara's parents know her better than anybody, and they said that this is very uncharacteristic of her, that she said that she was coming home, and she would, in fact, come home. But in this situation, they were not worried that Cara had gone out partying with her friends. They were worried that something bad had happened to her, because she always does what she says she's going to do. She is 20 years old, but from what it shows and what we've seen from her parents is that she's really squared away and she takes care of her business. So when she doesn't show up at her house, her parents are really worried that something bad happened to her. And unfortunately for her parents, those worst fears would come true. I'll get there in just a second. So Cara's parents, after they notified the police and the police said that they couldn't do anything because it had not been 24 to 48 hours, her parents decide that they're going to go look for her themselves. So they get some people together and they start looking in that area from Escondido, California to El Cajon. And they drive back and forth and they're looking in the area and they're searching in the area, but they don't find anything. They're checking the gas stations, they're checking the different routes that she was on, and they don't find anything. So as it goes into the early morning hours, they decide that they're probably going to call it a night and see if they can maybe search the next day and also make a police report. But just as it's around 6 a.m., I believe, and Cara's dad is driving back to their home, and he is about to call it a day, as I mentioned, but he notices that on a dead-end road, the road, ironically, is called Mercy Road. It is an off-ramp to I-15 in San Diego County, and this would have been on Cara's route as she was heading home. Her dad notices that her car is at the end of this dead-end and secluded road. So he pulls up on the vehicle, he looks inside, Cara's window is down, the keys are still in the ignition, but Cara is nowhere to be found. So at this point, Cara's dad gets really freaked out, as he should have. He calls the police, he lets them know. At this point, this is when we're going to go into the missing persons mode. So the cops start looking into everything, start checking everything out. It doesn't take them long to find Cara's body. She was found just down the road from where her car was parked at the bottom of a 65-foot ravine near a bridge. So from what I understand about this area, if you were to leave that kind of dead-end road and drive back out, there was some sort of ravine that was tied into that area, and the body looked like it was dumped from the top of the ravine and down to the bottom. When they recover Cara's body, they notice that she has bruising on her face and she has been strangled to death. Now, in situations like this, we might look at that and say this looks like an incident where somebody might have been killed and possibly sexually assaulted. But in Cara's case, an autopsy would later confirm that she was not sexually assaulted. She was just murdered. None of her belongings had been taken. her vehicle was still there. So it was very odd. In the beginning, the cops were looking at this like maybe Cara stopped at a convenience store, picked up a hitchhiker, and something went bad. But her parents stated that under no circumstances would she probably have stopped and picked up a hitchhiker. That just wasn't like her to do something like that. And so they did not believe that she would have stopped and picked anybody up. So they kind of ruled that out from the get-go as far as her parents goes. But the cops were kind of looking in every direction. Now, there was confirmation from that Chevron convenience store that the clerk saw her pull up and get gas and leave. So they knew that she had made it to that convenience store, and not long after that, somehow her car ends up on Mercy Road, and then she's dead at the bottom of a ravine. But they don't know what happened in between. So they do what they do, and they start collecting evidence and processing the scene and getting everything together. Now, one of the things that happens after this is that the news in this area, I believe it was KCST TV, started covering this homicide. And one of the reporters from this news station decided that they were going to kind of do a ride-along with a California Highway Patrol officer. And they were going to do a segment on self-protection for female drivers. Now, in this interview and kind of ride-along segment, the reporter rides with a trooper named Craig Pyre. He had been with the California Highway Patrol for 13 years at this time, and he was assigned to this project to try to help out with getting women to familiarize themselves with self-defense and also situations that might arise if they picked up somebody and the situation goes bad. Trooper Pyre was with this reporter, and he was giving them kind of play-by-play to things that you can expect if you get into situations that turn bad, how to protect yourself, and he was also making statements about, well, you know, that women could pick up hitchhikers or strangers or give people rides and end up sexually assaulted, or men could pick up strangers, you know, hitchhikers, and get assaulted and robbed. And he was going through a lot of different scenarios on there. But the weird thing about this is that over 20 people after this, mostly women, called in to the news station and police station and said that the trooper that was on that segment, Trooper Pyre, they recognized him. And they recognized him in a way that was unbecoming of Pyre himself. And what these people said is that Pyre had pulled them over in the past, and he was very unprofessional when he pulled them over. Now, the thing that made this whole thing stand out was that the majority of the people that called in said that Pyre had pulled them over on the interstate, on Interstate 15, and then got on his speaker and told them that they needed to pull down this off-ramp for their safety and get off the highway. Now, when they took the off-ramp, does anybody want to take a guess at what road they were on? Mercy Road. The majority of the people that called in said that Pyre told them to pull down Mercy Road for their safety. He said that he wanted them to get off the highway so that they wouldn't get hit by other vehicles. But when he got them onto Mercy Road, most of the women said that he was very unprofessional in the fact that he would flirt with them. He would ask them questions about, well, inappropriate questions is what I understand. I don't know exactly what those questions are, but they said inappropriate. And he'd also, while he was leaning on the window of their car, try to touch them or rub their shoulders. Some of the women said that he would caress their hair and other weird things like that. At the same time, they said that he would give them advice about safety things. Some people said that he would pull them back and make them sit in his patrol car, and he would keep them there for long periods of time that would go past what a normal traffic stop should be. So when they got this information, the California Highway Patrol looked into it, and they noticed that they had had reports like this in the past on Pyre. The only thing is that they did not actually look into these complaints. They kind of let them go. Because at this time, Pyre has a pretty stellar reputation at the California Highway Patrol. He's never really gotten into any trouble. He's never had any issues. And so I think that when the complaints came in, they probably just looked at it as frivolous complaints, people calling in and upset about being pulled over. And so they're trying to make a complaint against the trooper. But this is just the starting point for Pyre, because I watched a Forensic Files episode on this, and his supervisor was on that show, and they said that they did not want to believe that someone like Pyre could have done something like this, but he did say that they need to go ahead and look at it and clear him just like they would do anybody else. This is a bad situation, and there were some mishaps on the California Highway Patrol, but at least they were able to admit that they made that mistake, and they need to go in and look at some situations that might either exclude Pyre or not. So originally at the beginning of the investigation, Cara's boyfriend was a suspect because he was the last person to have seen her. But as I mentioned, they had the gas station clerk that saw her at the gas station filling up, and there was also another witness there that saw Cara that night. So he was pretty quickly excluded. But one of the things that another witness told them, the witness that said that he saw her there that night filling up with fuel, is that he said he saw a California Highway Patrol pull into the parking lot right after Cara pulled out, and he made a U-turn and started following her. And he wasn't sure what happened after that, but then this places someone in a highway patrol car with Cara just before she dies. So they look at Pyre's records, and it shows that he was on a traffic stop around the same time that Cara was murdered, several miles away. So they know, thank goodness, it probably wasn't him, and they can move on in the investigation. A couple weeks later, after some of the forensics start getting worked out, they notice that Cara has blood on one of her boots or her shoes. She's got blood and skin under her fingernails, and they found a small gold fabric on her shirt. And when they looked at this fabric, they noticed that something was very interesting about this particular fabric. It was made using a yellow pigment instead of a dye, which is most common in these fabrics. So it was a distinctive and unusual gold rayon fiber. That's what they found on Cara's clothes. Now, the interesting thing about this is that it was only common at the time to be used in the gold star on the patch of the California Highway Patrol uniform. Now they have to go and circle back to the idea that, holy crap, could this actually be a California Highway Patrol that committed this murder? And one of the other interesting things about Pyre right after this incident is that it appeared, and several of his colleagues pointed out, that he had visible scratch marks on his face. And would you believe it if I also told you that in the interview, in the ride-along, in Pyre's car, with the news camera, those scratch marks were visible on his face just after Cara was killed. Now, I know you're probably asking yourself, well, did somebody say something about these scratch marks on Pyre's face? And yes, they did. Pyre said that he got these scratch marks on his face because, clumsy him, he fell while he was fueling up at the headquarters, and it is common that certain departments have their own fueling stations, or fueling areas. Like the department I worked at, we had our own gas pumps, so we would fill up, before shift or after shift usually, so that your car is ready to go for the next shift, just behind the sheriff's office, and you didn't have to get gas anywhere else unless you were going out of town or you had to do a transport or something like that. But In other circumstances, you wouldn't go to a gas station. You would go to the pumps that were at the sheriff's office. So Pyre was saying that he was going over to fill up with fuel, and he tripped over a curb and hit a chain link fence. The only problem about this is, from what I understand, the chain link fence was about 10 feet away from the curb, and it was pretty tall. So it would be unusual that, or if Pyre or anybody else could trip over this curb and hit the fence and cause the damage to the face that Pyre had. So then they really kind of start looking into Pyre for the first time and say, okay, we got to go back and figure this out. They asked Pyre for his uniform and his boots and duty belt and everything that he was wearing the night that Cara went missing. And some time had gone by, so it would be very unlikely that they would find anything, you would think, because Pyre probably would have gotten all of his clothes cleaned and things like that. So they take all of his clothing in for evidence, and they start looking at it. One thing they also do is they go back and look at that logbook to see if they missed something in his patrol logbook. Because at this time, everything's not computerized like it is now. Now, if you wanted to find a car at a police department that was, I don't know, mid-size, and most certainly the highway patrol, you can get on a computer and you can see exactly where that person is. You can see exactly what they're doing. In some departments, you can actually access their video feed from inside the building. So there's a lot of different technologies that have come about that weren't available at this time. So Pyre is keeping track of all of his interactions with people in a logbook. And they go back to the time that Cara was murdered, and they notice something that either they missed or they overlooked, but it was at the same time that Cara was killed. The log that was written in for the time slot, remember when I said that he was on a traffic stop miles away? There was obvious eraser marks on that time slot. So it appeared that Pyre had written something in there across the whole line item, and then erased all of it out, and then went back and wrote something over that. This was one of the things that was a dot in this investigation, and they're starting to connect these dots. Now, when they looked at the fiber for the uniforms, it would be unrealistic to think that you could find a patch that was missing some sort of fibers off of the Gold Star. That would be everybody's patch. That would be anybody that was in the California Highway Patrol at the time would probably be missing something off that, because you bump things and you hit things. But since they found that on Cara's body and they could tie that back to that specific uniform, they were hoping they could find something else that could tie either Pyre to that or remove him from that investigation. One thing they did notice is that they found some blood on Cara's belongings. I believe it was her shoes. And they weren't able, due to DNA testing back then, they wouldn't be able to identify it directly to Pyre, but they could get a blood type from that droplet of blood. And I believe that what they got was a match for a blood type AB or B negative. And whichever that was Pyre's exact blood type. So now they're starting to put that together more. This blood found on her clothing matching Pyre's blood type. This fiber found on her clothes coming from the Gold Star. And then when they looked at Pyre's uniform and duty belt, they were able to find purple fibers on his belongings that matched the purple sweater that Cara was wearing the night that she was killed. Now, if you remember back when I told you how she was killed, I mentioned that she had been struck several times in the head and she had also been strangled. And what they were able to figure out is that Cara had been strangled by a nylon rope. And they were able to look and get the notch patterns off the rope and kind of figure out exactly what kind of rope was used to strangle Cara, because the bruising on her neck was so specific. You could see the rope in her skin. When they go back and search Pyre's patrol car, they find the same rope that matches perfectly to the bruising on Cara's neck in Pyre's trunk underneath the spare tire. So you'd have to think to yourself, if Pyre is the guy and he's been a state trooper for 13 years, he has been awfully sloppy about the way that he got rid of evidence for this case. When they went back and looked at the bruising on Cara's face, they said that it resembled closely to what looked like the head of a mag light, typically carried by state troopers. So, after all of this evidence was collected, and they started talking to other troopers at the department, like I mentioned earlier about the gas pumps and all of that, when Pyre said that he tripped and fell at the gas pumps and that's how he got the scratches on his face, there was an off-duty state trooper that saw Pyre an hour before that incident happened and said that he already had the scratch marks on his face at that time. There was another state trooper that also said that while she was in her FTO phase, which is that training phase we talked about, she was with Pyre and he actually took her down Mercy Road and told her that if she ever needed to dump a dead body, this would be the perfect spot because of how secluded it was. So a lot of things are not looking up for him. And it's at this time that Pyre is actually placed under arrest for the murder of Cara Knott. And one of the interesting things about when he was arrested is that his attorney was able to get all the indictments of the arrest sealed until the trial began. So not a lot of information was getting out to the public at this time. So a lot of Pyre's friends and family were still on the belief that there's no way that he could have done this. Like I stated earlier, he had been a trooper for 13 years. He had a really clean record. He had a good reputation, not only within his department, but also in the community. His wife, which I think they had only been married at the time for 6 months, probably his second or third wife, if I had to take a guess, stated that he never showed any signs of aggression. He was never violent towards her. No one in the community said that they ever saw anything with him that would give them this impression. So they kind of rallied around him in the beginning, and they set up funds to collect money for his wife so that she could have some money to live on while he was in jail. And then also they collected money for his legal fees. Now later on, a judge would rule that due to his money situations that he did not have the money to hire an attorney, and the state provided an attorney for him, or the county provided an attorney for him free of charge. But he kind of had a lot of people rallying around him at the time of the murder, or at the time of his arrest, excuse me. So when the trial gets ready to start, the DA's office presents all the evidence against Pyre, and it goes to a hung jury. This is something we've talked about several times. I think the split was 7 thought that he was guilty and 5 thought that there was not enough evidence there to convict Pyre. After this hung jury, the DA's office said that they would try Pyre again, and he was released on bond sometime during this point, and I believe the bond started out at $500,000 and then was later raised to $1 million, but this took place before the original trial. So going into trial number 2, they present the evidence again, they come back with a stronger case, and Pyre is convicted of the murder. Now, Pyre at this time and to this day still claims that he is an innocent man. He says that he did not do it and that the DA's office did not have the burden of proof to get Pyre sentenced to 25 years to life. Pyre has come up for parole several times since he was sentenced to 25 to life. The first time was in 2004. The second time was in 2008. The third time was in 2012. And on the third time, he was denied parole all 3 times. And on the third time, they said that he would not be eligible to come up parole again for 15 years. This puts him coming up for parole again in 2027. And one of the reasons they stated that Pyre hasn't made parole yet, because he's considered a minimum security type inmate, which means they haven't had any issues from what I understand with Pyre. But what they said is that in 2004, because DNA had advanced so much, the DNA testing, they offered, one of the Innocence Project's groups out of California said that they would take the DNA evidence from this case and have it tested so that they could prove that it wasn't Pyre's blood that was found on Cara's shoes or her clothing. But the interesting thing is that Pyre says that he is innocent beyond a reasonable doubt, but he declined to have the DNA testing done on that blood, and I wonder why that would be. I've got my suspicions, but I'll let you make yours. But that is one of the things that they have said is the reason why Pyre has not been paroled. One is because he has not taken any credibility for this murder. He has not said that he has done it, and also because he will not let them test that DNA, or he has refused to let them test that DNA, which I think somebody could probably get a hold of it and test it to make sure, but they haven't done that yet. But they stated that because he refuses to have that DNA tested, that kind of shows his guilt more than anything. And that's something that I would like to talk about in the debrief, because I've got a few opinions on that. And I think that this is one of those situations where we look at this case, and that's why I was kind of saying it. We feel like this is one of those worst type scenarios where your trust is broken and you feel like that law enforcement, above all, should be the least likely candidate for a murder like this. But things like this can happen. Did they always happen? No. Are the majority of police officers good? Absolutely. But this is one of those things that we like to talk about on the Murder Project because it falls under that section of misconduct. And that misconduct sometimes falls into law enforcement, and we like to talk about the good and the bad. So I think for this episode, I'm going to leave it there because there's a few more details that I hadn't discussed that I want to talk about in the debrief with Mike, and kind of tie all this together and talk about how this whole thing kind of came about. What are the possible scenarios about the traffic stop? What happened during the traffic stop? How all of this kind of came about? How the body was transported? Because I didn't get into any of those details. Like a lot of different things that have come up in this case that we know from over the years that can really give us like a deep dive into this thing, because that's what we like to do on the debrief. So I'm going to leave it there for this episode, but please come back and join us on the debrief. I can't wait to talk to you guys again. Goodbye. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening to this episode of The Murder Project. We thank you guys so much. Our numbers are going up and we appreciate it a lot. If you guys are looking for us on any of the social media platforms, you can find us on Facebook at The Murder Project. If you need to search for us, we're at facebook.com/podcasttmp. If you're searching for us on the old Instagrams, we are at The Murder Project. And if you're looking for us on the old Twitter box, we are at The Murder Pod. Also, don't forget, whatever platform you are listening on, please go in there and hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. If you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, please go in there, hit that subscribe button, leave us a review, and hit that 5 stars. Thank you guys so much who have done that already and who have left us reviews. We really look forward to reading those and getting those, and thank you so much. Also, remember, if you need to leave us a longer form question or comment, we have an email. If you want to reach out to us by email, we are contact@themurderproject.com, and we will get back to you as soon as we can. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Thank you for listening. I look forward to talking to you again on the debrief. But before I go, please remember, head up, eyes up, and stay alive.